So, first of all, thank you, Evan, for inviting me. Um, Let me give my short introduction before starting today and talking about what exactly the API is and how it applies to the business analyst. Um, so, I have more than 25 years of um, industry experience from software development to the design to the architecture um, to the different domain. Uh, in this video, I would like to talk about the APIs from the business analyst perspective and deep down into the technical terms that how it applies to the developers, how the API concept you can understand, and then in further videos we talk about that how you can write a user story and the APIs and how you can use those user stories in terms of the domain driven design and also the testing frameworks. So the whole idea is to understand and talk the terms which developers understand and understand and grasp the concept when the developers talk about the APIs, the user story, the epic, and those kind of things. So with no further delay, let me come to the topic. So I will come in the way of FAQ. So I will put some questions and then talk about the topic so that we can focus, and also same time you can prepare for your any further career movement, interviews, and those kind of things. So what's the API? API is basically, if you understand what's the A, P, and I means here, it's an application programming interface. What that means is any application talks to another application interfacing each other. That means an application, let's assume that human body is a software. Each component of the body, when I say component, the component means here is eyes, nose, mouth, hands, all these are the body components. Each components talk to each other in some way, and then that's how our body functions every time, right? So in terms of software, each different components of the software interact with each other, and that's called API. It doesn't mean any web services here. It doesn't mean any REST API, microservices, all those concepts we will talk about one by one. Let's first understand what's the API. So what that means is API could be anything. Any software component could be an API. It's not necessarily that it has to be a web services, it has to be a REST APIs, or it has to be a specific technology, or it has to be a specific um, website or mobile app. So first understand the API, right? Now, let's say that another example of API could be, let's say two people meet, right? And both talks in a different language. Now, how they will interact with each other, there should be some standard way, right? They have to talk to each other in such a way that both people can understand each other, right? And let's say that we have a service, or let's say that we have a way that is called a translator, that let's say there is a translator in between of them, right, which can communicate to both of them. Now this translator, and let's assume that this translator know multiple different languages. So wherever this person goes, the translator has to be in between of them to translate, so that both parties can talk. Here, that you can, for time being, you can take this translator as an API, and I will elaborate one by one these concepts in more details. Now the next question comes in my mind is, do we need REST services for API? No. The API could be any application, software program, any software application can talk to each other internally in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be a REST services. So when somebody talks about API, first try to understand what the system components are talking to each other. What are the different components? What is exactly they're trying to communicate? It's a binary operation. There is definitely two parties involved here, but what they're trying to explain in terms of interfacing. So in API, I is very important part when we try to understand or talk about the API, which is called interface, right? So application programming interface. Application, that's the software components. Programming, there could be a way to talk, right? The software components have some kind of programming, some kind of instructions on based on which they talk. Interfacing is the important part, whether they talk to each other, right? So when we talk about the API, it's not necessarily the REST services. Now, misconception about API. The next things comes in my mind is what are the misconceptions? So the misconception is that people think API in terms of microservices, or people think when there is an API, there is a web services, or if there is an API, there is a REST web services, right? That's not true. That's the most used way of that, but there could be a different kind of APIs. There are monolithic APIs, right, where we were using the soap based services. Now there is a REST APIs, there is a composite API. So there are different type of APIs, which I will go it in other videos and slowly to make sure that you're getting the concept, and that concept would be the solid concept. Now, what's the difference between web services and API? So we talk about that API is a very generic way. It could be any application programming interface talking to any other application programming interface. Now, when we talk about what's the difference in the web services and API? So the web services, as name suggests, anything, what's the web means? So web is the internet comes into the picture. So anything over the internet is a web. Now services, any services provided over the internet is a web services. Any services, you can take the payment services, or if you're going to let's take an example, like you want to order some food, right? You can go to the mobile app, or you can go to the internet browser, open the website and place an order from there. What you're doing is basically, even if you get the order, physical order, but you're placing an order over the internet, that means you are consuming a service, you are utilizing a service over the internet. So that's the web services. API is the one software components talking to another software components, right? There should be some kind of interfacing, and it could be monolithic application, it could be the REST API, it could be the different things, right? So web services and API, that's the difference. Now if I talk about base structure of the API, so when we talk about the what's the basic structure of API? So when we say that there are the software components, right, talking to each other. When we talk to each other, or let's say there is a client and there is a server, right? There is a certain way to talk, right? Means you have certain input, right? You have to send that, okay, this is what I want. Then you have to tell to the other party, right? Let's say you log into the your Gmail ID, right? So what you type google.com, right, or gmail.com, and then you put your user ID and the password. What is the user ID and password? That's the way you are communicating to the Gmail. You are communicating to the server. So that means every time you log into the Gmail, you have to give your user ID and password. That's the way of communication. That means there is a server which is expecting some input from you. You are giving the input, and as a part of that input, you get the response. Right? So for the basic structure for time being, understand that when we talk in terms of API, there should be a way to understand by both the parties. So there would be input, there would be some processing which the server will do or the other party will do, and then there would be a response given to the party which sent an input. In the next video, I will talk more about how to gather the details of the API, and then in terms of what exactly the REST API means, and how to write the user story when for API user stories, and how you can write in such a way that your user story can be as is used by the developers while doing the development. The user story can be directly converted into the test cases, test scenario, and used by different testing tools. And those user stories should be you as a BA would be able to write even the test scenarios utilizing your user story. And that is called cross functional, right? Every company, every organization is moving towards the cross functional. They don't want the BA to sit idle after writing the story and say that I don't know, or I cannot support the testing team because I don't know the technology. So whole idea of the concept I'm teaching going forward is to make you and contribute towards the whole software development life cycle, not just for the user story or not just for the non-technical work. I hope you like that. Please subscribe the video, and I will keep adding more videos and more updates on that. Thank you. Bye.